Franz Kafka said that the meaning of life is that it stops. In that very short quote from Kafka, we have the evocation of meaning and death. The two things seem inextricably linked in the human experience. Few poets are able to communicate this in quite so grand a fashion as good old Emily Dickinson. This video is part of 3 separate playlists here on the channel. Number 1 being obviously the Echoes of Emily playlist, but number 2 being a playlist of Emily Dickinson poetry discussions, and third, the general playlist for poetry discussions. If you like or appreciate the work that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. So consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more literature in the future. There's a certain slant of light winter afternoons that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us, we can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it, any. 'Tis the seal despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. So there are 5 talking points that I want to get to with this poem, but I thought it might be beneficial to maybe take a step-by-step sort of walk through the poem. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. In winter, there's a light at a certain time of day that comes down at such an angle that it is more oppressive, it is more stultifying, it is more maybe terrifying, it is more paralyzing, even than those heavy church bells. Heavenly hurt it gives us, we can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. This slant of light that oppresses, it doesn't physically oppress us. It is something more spiritual, something more internal that tells us, okay, something's going on right now. That slant of light right now is indicating something in me, is drawing something out of me that is spiritual, that is more on the level of things that make life worth living than things that stop life from being able to be lived, right? This isn't a gunshot wound. No, it's something that is more personal than that. None may teach it, any. 'Tis the seal despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. Now this line here, 'tis the seal despair. This is despair in its truest, most recognizable sense. An imperial affliction, an imperial affliction, something from on high that is doing this thing to us, sent us of the air. It is inescapable in the same way that the air we have to breathe is inescapable. We do not choose which air we breathe, and we have to breathe air. When it comes, the landscape listens. This slant of light doesn't just cascade over the land. The very land itself stops to take heed. It is so impressive that shadows hold their breath, trying not to be noticed. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. I think that's pretty self-explanatory there. Now, last video in this series, we talked about how Emily Dickinson it's always worth trying to look for time in Emily Dickinson's poetry, and oftentimes the way that time will be represented is by death. Either the specter of death or the personification of death. We have here the look of death. So, slant of light, the way the light is slanted depends on where the sun is. The sun is moving, giving us some measurement of time, and then we end the poem with death itself. Baby, we're 2 for 2. The second thing that I want to talk about in this poem, we have here cathedral tunes, yes? We have here slant of light, the light comes from the sun. We have the very universe itself. We have heavenly hurt being invoked. We have, so sort of this, I would argue, is a reference to the on high. We have death itself. All of these things, we have no mention of God. Where is God? We are invoking heaven. We are talking about cathedral tunes. We are here assessing the machinations of the universe itself, the universe that would have been bit and pieced, depending on which day it was in creation, by the Christian God. We have, however, no mention of God. We have all of these things that are pointing to the divine, but our speaker never mentions God. There's much conjecture as to whether or not Emily Dickinson was actually a Christian. There's a lot of conjecture as to whether or not Emily Dickinson even believed in a God, let alone the Christian God, a specific God. And it's the important thing I think to remember here is that the poems basically never pass any judgment whether or not the audience believes in God, but also I think that it is important to take into account the fact that these poems were written over the course of Emily Dickinson's life. Do you feel the same way about God that you did 20 years ago? Will you feel the same way about God if you are so lucky as to be here in 20 years from now that you do today? And basically a 40-year career, imagine yourself right in the middle of it. 40 years from now, 20 years from now, will you feel the same way about God? Will you feel the same way about the afterlife? Will you feel the same way about scriptures as you did 20 years ago? So, I just think that it's interesting to note that there is no, in a time, by the way, in a time and a place, by the way, when it would have been very tempting for any individual writing this type of poem to put God in there, Emily Dickinson did not. This, right here, we have this. Heavenly hurt. Heavenly hurt it gives us. I ask you, what is heavenly hurt? This slant of light that is casting shadows on a winter afternoon gives us heavenly hurt. What does that mean, heavenly hurt? I thought heaven was about perfection. Heaven was about wholeness. Heaven was about nearness to God. What could there be in heaven that causes hurt? Well, in my younger days, I often wondered, what if I were so lucky as to get to heaven and find that all of the people that mattered to me weren't there? Is heavenly hurt absence? Is heavenly hurt discovering that you will never have something important to you again, someone important to you again? Not only that, you don't decide who gets to be in heaven, do you? And if this is not as it pertains to your religion, simply substitute whatever it is in your religion, nirvana, whatever it is in your religion that this does correlate, with which this does correlate. You don't get to decide who's there. What are you going to do? Walk down the hall to God's room, knock on the door, and say, "Hey, my mother, brother, sister, father should be here? Where's my wife? My son? My daughter? What are we doing here?" Are you going to go make that demand? Is that what is meant by the phrase heavenly hurt? The recognition that you are without something that is very crucial to you, and you have no way to get it back. Someone very crucial to you, and you have no way to get it back. That, I think, is an interesting idea from this poem. Now, I said I was going to try to work nihilism and hauntology into all of these discussions. Why? Because I like Emily Dickinson, I like nihilism, and I like hauntology. So, here we go. Nihilism. The universe does not care about you, right? So, this slant of light is just the universe doing what the universe does. And though that oppresses you, like the heft of cathedral tunes, the universe doesn't care. Doesn't give a dang, bro. Doesn't care about you. You can feign your pain. You can claim your difference, but it does not matter. Winter afternoons are when this happens. Winter afternoons are when this happens, whether you like it or not. Winter afternoons are when this slant of light comes down and treats you like blades of grass thrown to an uncaring wind. It is as it is, regardless of you. And finally, with hauntology here, one of the hallmarks of hauntology is how the past dictates the present, how the past exists in the present, how the past influences and lives within the present. Now, I hear what you're saying. Doesn't happen in this poem. That's not happening here. There's no ghost. There's no ghastly apparitions. There's no poltergeist. Well, maybe not. There is a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses us, like the heft of cathedral tunes. There is a certain slant of light. Winter afternoons. Now, it's a little bit confusing because there is a winter afternoons, but this is past tense. We're speaking about the past and the future, at least hypothetically, insofar as you expect there to be a tomorrow. Time here, this is time, certain slant of light, becomes a character in this poem. Time here, the character of time, is simultaneously past and future, as well as present, oppresses. So we have this slant of light, this time, that is existing simultaneously in the past, in the present, and the future. That's pretty cool. And is really only the kind of stuff that you will get from so brilliant a poet as Emily. There's a certain slant of light winter afternoons that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us, we can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it, any. 'Tis the seal despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death.